Hi, I'm Andrew Dolkart. Welcome to the NYC Lgbt Historic Sites Project's Jane's Walk here in the Washington Square area. And this is a really perfect day to be doing a digital Jane's Walk because it is cold and dreary out here. We're in Washington Square Park, and this is really the perfect place to start a Jane's Walk because, of course, one of the reasons why Washington Square has been preserved has to do with Jane Jacobs, who fought Robert Moses about cutting Fifth Avenue through Washington Square. So what could be a better place to start a Jane's Walk? So the NYC LGBT Historic Sites Project was founded about 5 years ago by two colleagues and myself, and our interest was identifying and interpreting sites of significance to queer history in New York. We're all preservationists, so we were really interested in the power of place. So we deal with buildings that are extant, and our idea is to make an invisible history visible. We have a spectacular website, which if you're not familiar with, I highly recommend, www.nyclgbtsites.org. And we also do National Register nominations, and we do walking tours, and we do school projects, and all kinds of lectures and all kinds of things that relate to getting out the word about the significance of LGBT history as part of American history. And of course, Greenwich Village is a key place in the history of queer New York. And so we're going to look at a few sites in the Washington Square area. There are many, many more in this area. So first, just standing here in the square, there are a number of really important sites. And if you look over here, you can see the Judson Memorial Church. Judson Memorial Church is one of the masterpieces of Stanford White. We're gonna move a little bit.
Busy day in the park.
So Judson Memorial Church is one of the masterpieces of Stanford White, partner at the firm of McKim, White, that dates from the early 1890s, really pioneering example of Renaissance-inspired design. This was built as a Baptist church, basically to cater to the Italian immigrant community that was moving into the area. But that wasn't particularly successful, but in the post-war period, this became a major center for progressive politics and art. They were instrumental in establishing a theater program and a dance program, which involved many queer artists and works of art that dealt with LGBT issues. In the theater project, you had Fornes, a Cuban-American playwright whose Fefu and Her Friends was recently revived. Maria Fornes was initially done here. The dance theater included a number of LGBT choreographers, including Paxton, who worked with Robert Rauschenberg, the artist, to create some really important postmodern dance. And politically, they were very important. Al Carmines, one of the ministers here, was one of the first gay ministers in America. He came out while he was here. He was very involved with the theater program. This was one of the first churches to march in the Gay Pride Parade under its own banner, and they did marriage ceremonies before same-sex marriage was legal, because they understood that these relationships were really, really important. And so on many, many levels, this is architecturally, in the arts, and in politics, this is a really, really important site. And just across the way from it is 2 Fifth Avenue. 2 Fifth Avenue, a post-war apartment building. This was the home of Larry Kramer, who lived in the low red brick part that's right across the street from the square. And it was in his living room that the idea for GMHC, the Gay Men's Health Crisis, was established. Kramer was very, very concerned about the AIDS crisis and the fact that the government was not responding, and realized that gay men really needed to organize to fight this disease. And then when he became frustrated with the conservativeness of GMHC, he was involved in the formation of ACT UP as a more radical organization later in the the 1980s. Also living in this apartment building on a higher floor were Edie Windsor and Thea Spire, and they were married in Toronto, and New York State recognized their marriage, but the U.S. government did not. And when Thea Spire died, Edie Windsor had to pay a substantial tax on the estate, and she sued because had her marriage been recognized, she would not have had to pay this tax. And this went up to the Supreme Court, which ruled that the federal government had to recognize gay marriages from states that also recognized gay marriage. And so she was given a refund on the taxes that she had paid, and she became, one of the great celebrities in the gay rights movement. So we're going to start walking out of the park, but you can see on the west side of the park, on the top story of the apartment building at 29 Fifth Avenue, in 1942, Eleanor and Franklin Roosevelt bought an apartment there. Eleanor Roosevelt had lived in Greenwich Village since the 1930s. She liked living in Greenwich Village because it was in her apartment. She was easy to have meetings with her, the women whom she was involved with romantically, and also many of her friends, including many lesbian couples, lived in Greenwich Village, which was a very welcoming neighborhood for same-sex couples. And so she was within easy reach of her friends and colleagues that were involved in liberal politics. And after Franklin D. Roosevelt's death, she moved in here permanently for a number of years. When she was the U.S. representative to the United Nations, she lived here. So this is also a really important site, and there is a plaque commemorating her on the building. So we're going to walk out of the park.
So while we're walking out of the park, feel free, if you have questions for Andrew, to drop them in the comments. But when we get to the edge of the park, Andrew, am I right that we're going to be at the edge of the Greenwich Village Historic District? Can you tell us a little bit about that district? Because the project has some great things happening right now on that front.
Sure, but first I should introduce Christiana Pena, who's our social media guru. And please, if you have questions, send them in, and I'll try to answer them. So the NYC LGBT Historic Sites Project has a grant from the National Park Service to do an overlay on the Greenwich Village National Register listing. Greenwich Village has been listed on the National Register, the federal listing of individual buildings and historic districts of architectural and historical note. But this was done so many years ago that there is no mention of anything relating to LGBT history. So we are doing an overlay of the entire historic district, adding all of these buildings and sites that have importance to LGBT history, where people lived, where important events took place, where demonstrations took place, going from Stonewall on to many other places.
Do you happen to know off the top of your head approximately how many number of buildings we're talking about?
Well, we're talking about, I think, several hundred, over 100 certainly sites, and we're still finding more. So this is a really ongoing project as we learn more and more about this. And Greenwich Village, of course, was so important in the history of the arts in America, and so many people involved in the arts lived in Greenwich Village at one time or another. So we're really looking into that. So as we exit the park, it's important to know that in the history of gay New York, the Washington Square area was in the beginning in the late 19th century was a really important center for meeting places, particularly for gay men, but also in the interwar period for lesbians as well. And one of the things that George Chauncey talks about in his great book, Gay New York, is how the fence at Washington, on the west side of Washington Square, became a major cruising site in the early 20th century, especially in the pre-war period. So here I am lounging on the fence, and I'm imagining what it would have been like, in the early decades of the 20th century, when this section of the village was the sort of heart of the Bohemian area of Greenwich Village. And we're just going to scratch the surface in our discussion here today, but there are many, many important sites throughout this area. The Slide on Bleecker Street, which was a late 19th century dive bar with young men in drag, and other men would come in, including very wealthy men like the architect Ogden Codman, and it was closed down as being one of the most degenerate places in America. Just 2 blocks up around the corner was where Lorraine Hansberry moved after she wrote A Raisin in the Sun, and with the profits from this really important play, the first play written by a black woman to be on Broadway, she purchased a building around the corner. But just because this is short, we don't have time to look at every one of them. So we're going to go across the street and look at a former church that has a really interesting history. So we're crossing West 4th Street, and we're crossing out of the original Greenwich Village Historic District into the South Village Historic District, which was designated much more recently, and in which there's a great deal of LGBT history. And one of the interesting things is that part of the designation report was written by one of our co-founders, Jay Shockley, and so it's one of the earliest landmarks designation reports to really deal with issues of gay history.
While we're walking around, feel free to go to nyclgbtsites.org and use the interactive map. You can trace exactly where Andrew's taking us. You can dive more into each of these sites and explore.
So we are now across the street from the former Washington Square Methodist Church. This is a really great pre-Civil War church with a marble facade designed by a very important but not very well-known architect named Gamaliel King. And then next door to it is the 1870s parish house. And this was a very, very liberal congregation. The minister here was another very early out gay minister, and was really intent on attracting a very diverse clientele, and also opening up the church to progressive organizations to meet. So a lot of political organizations met here. The Gay Men's Chorus had its first rehearsals here in the church, and in the parish house was the home of the Salsa Soul Sisters, which became a really, really important meeting place for Black and Latina women. I have the flyer. Yeah, so we have a flyer here, and you can see one of the broadsides that represents it. It was according to one person, there was no other place for women of color to go and sit down and talk about what it meant to be a black lesbian in America. And I think that that's really important. That you know, just as the gay rights movement was really revving up, that there needed to be places where different groups within the community could meet and talk freely, because a lot of the activism was that we hear about was done by gay white men, but there was a lot of other kinds of activism going on in the village. So we're going to go across the street. And by the way, this church is now been converted into apartments. The minister's name was Paul Abels. I had forgotten what his name was.
Say it again?
The minister's name was Paul Abels. Abel's bishop tried to get him thrown out of the church, but the local group of Methodist churches really supported him, which was really great. So he was not thrown out as minister of the church. down the block, it's a little hard to see because there's a FedEx blocking us, so we'll just walk down a little bit. The last building, which now has the Washington Square Diner in it, it's a little two-story building, and you just walk by and you wouldn't think anything about it. And that's one of the interesting things about making an invisible history visible, is sometimes really important things occurred in a building that we don't really see. In the basement of this building was the Mad Hatter, which was one of the most important tea rooms in the Bohemian era of Greenwich Village in the early 20th century, and it was opened by a lesbian couple, one of whom called herself Jimmy. This became one of the central meeting places in the village, and also was welcoming to all kinds of people, including to queer individuals in the Bohemian Village. And then later, a lesbian bar called the Pony Stable opened on the first floor of this building. This attracted largely a white working class population of women who were interested in the butch femme dynamic that was evident in the post-war period, but it also attracted Audre Lorde, the really great African-American writer whose house on Staten Island is on our site and is also a New York City landmark. And she talked about how welcoming it was and how wonderful it was to be able to be in a space with other lesbian women. So if you have questions where especially while we're walking from site to site, it would be really great.
So Andrew, you just mentioned Audre Lorde House and Landmark. How many landmarks are there in New York City on the basis of their LGBTQ significance?
I believe that there are 7 sites that have been designated. We have the NYC LGBT Historic Sites Project has really been advocating for this. Stonewall was the first that was designated as an individual landmark. We did the National Register nomination for Stonewall, which was the first LGBT site ever recognized by the federal government. And then some years later, the Landmarks Commission did it as an individual landmark. And then for Stonewall 50, we worked with the Landmarks Commission, and they designated, I think, 6 additional sites, including the Audre Lorde House and
Women's Liberation.
The Women's Liberation Center.
The GAA Firehouse?
Oh yes, the GAA Firehouse, where the Gay Activists Alliance began in Soho, and several other sites. So this was really great, and we have sent another proposal to the Landmarks Commission for additional sites, and the commission says that they're evaluating our submission. So we're hopeful that there'll be more sites that are actually designated as landmarks, because it's really important, of course, to diversify the types of sites that are recognized, because the landmarks law allows you to deal with sites that are significant for their architecture, their history, and their culture. And of course, most sites have been designated for their architectural significance, but now, besides, of course, it's still important to do things for their architectural significance, but cultural and historical significance are also really important.
Well, and also on the diversity front, geographic diversity. We're here in the Village. Most people associate Greenwich Village with a lot of New York City's LGBT history, but one moment. But the NYC LGBT Historic Sites Project's website is across the 5 boroughs.
Yeah, and that's really important. We are looking at all 5 boroughs. Our colleague Gail Harris has done a wonderful survey in Staten Island, and has done listed a lot of sites, and we've added a lot of sites on Staten Island. We're always looking for you out there to nominate sites, especially in the outer boroughs that we don't know about. And so we're really enthusiastic about doing sites everywhere that represent diverse communities in diverse sections of the city.
And would you say, so there's a question about the date ranges of some of the spaces that we're visiting today. Are we kind of jumping around chronologically? Are we hitting the village in one contained moment?
Well, we're really jumping around chronologically. There's the Bohemian era here, where the Mad Hatter tea room, for example, and then there's the era, the post-war era, when there are gay and especially a number of lesbian bars in this area, and when this and in the early and mid decades of the 20th century, when this was really the heart of the village. And then there were later sites like 2 Fifth Avenue, where with Edie Windsor and Theo Spire and Larry Kramer. So we're looking at layers and layers of history. And sometimes, the same building has layers of history, like the fact that the Mad Hatter from the early 20th century was in a building that later becomes the Pony Stable, a lesbian bar, in the post-World War II period. So, it's really exciting to be able to understand the layering of history in the city. And as I always like to say, buildings have lives. And we want to, and it's nice, of course, to look at a beautiful old building or an architectural masterpiece. But what did people do in that building that gives life to the building? And you can sort of see that across the street. We have a row here of federal row houses from the early 19th century. And a number of the original doorways survive. They're 2.5 stories with dormer windows. They're classic early 20th century New York row houses. But the central building, the one with the awning on it, has another really interesting history, because this was Eve's tea house, and Eve Adams Tea House. And this was a site that George Chauncey discovered when he was working on Gay New York, and Eve Adams was a Polish immigrant who took a nice American name when she arrived here. She was a Polish-Jewish immigrant, lesbian, and she opened a tea house here at this site, which was described as being a really wonderfully cozy place. It attracted a large number of lesbians. A journal, I think it was Vanity Fair, wrote that she had a sign on the door that said something to the effect that men could come in but weren't welcome. This is a legend about the building. It's probably not true, but she also wrote an early novel about lesbian love, and she was entrapped here. She was arrested. She was tried for pornography for her novel, and for disorderly conduct for the conduct of same-sex people in the tea house. She was found guilty, and she was deported. And sadly, the upshot of this is she went back to Europe. She got involved in radical politics, but ultimately she was deported to Auschwitz, where she was murdered. So these things have consequences here. So we're on McDougal Street between 3rd and 4th Street. And this was really the heart of the Bohemian village. We're across from the Provincetown Playhouse, and on this street was also the Heterodoxy Club, which was a feminist club. And there were, in this area, there were many other sites. There were on 3rd Street, the L used to run down 3rd Street, and so 3rd Street actually attracted a lot of bars. There were a number of lesbian bars on 3rd Street, and all throughout this area there are important sites. And so I invite you, if you're interested, on June 22nd, the NYC Lgbt Historic Sites Project is giving a walking tour of this area. I'll be doing a tour with another one of our co-founders, Ken Lusbader, and we'll be looking at all of the different sites throughout the area. It's a tour in the evening, so you can come after work. It stays light for a long time, and it's really a wonderful civilized thing to do, is do walking tour. I love giving walking tours on summer evenings. So I invite you all to do that, and I thank you for tuning in to our Jane's Walk today.
Thank you for all your questions. Happy Jane's Walk, everyone.